Afternoon, everybody. Uneducated Economist here. So about 8 years ago, I worked for a company that went bankrupt. It was a lumberyard that I had worked for. It was actually the second lumberyard that I had worked for that failed. The first one was back in 2001, and that was a pretty good sized company. It's a corporation of like maybe 20 yards or so here in the Pacific Northwest, and so it was a pretty happening business. And during the good times, that company really expanded. A lot of new yards. I remember it started off with like 12 yards. They ended up with like 8 yards altogether. A truss manufacturing plant, a wall manufacturing plant. These lumber yards were really, really doing something. And and then things started to slow down quite a bit. And we knew something was up when we started having issues with the vendors. Like we would go to order stuff and we couldn't get it, or it was really difficult to try and get things released to be shipped to the yard. And I noticed a lot of similarities in the second lumber yard as well. Now, that first lumber yard, we had these managers come in. These managers who said, "Hey, we come into lumber yards and we kind of take a look at how things are working and the inventory levels and employment, and we try and structure things to save the company." And we thought, cool, we're glad you're here. We don't want to lose our jobs. We hear that this corporation isn't doing too well and that it may fold. Hey, we're happy to have you here, right? These managers. And I remember one of the things they said was like, you got to be making good decisions when it comes to turnover, things that turn over very frequently, things that you can, get your money back on right away. This is the things we need to focus on. We can't be sitting on a lot of inventory or things that sit around for a while. And I remember, like, I don't know, it was in the middle of summertime, and these managers had been there for maybe a month or so. And I ordered a truckload of concrete. And this truckload of concrete shows up, and this manager comes out, and he's flipping out on me, right? "What are you doing ordering this much concrete? Oh my gosh, why are you doing this?" And I'm like, it's concrete, it's summer. We go through like a pallet a day. We're going to be through this thing in a couple of weeks, and then I'll have to order another one. And he was like, "Oh, you can turn it over in a month?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah." I said, this whole truckload, we'd probably go through two of these a month. And he chilled out a little bit, and he went back to what he was doing. And I was just like, "I thought you like operated lumber yards." And so I got to talking to him a little bit about things, and I realized this guy had no clue about building supplies whatsoever. He had like no idea. And I thought, there is no way that you manage lumber yards. There's no way. He was asking me what a glue lamp was. These are glue lamp beams. These are like a very common building item for building houses. Every lumberyard deals in glue lamps. And he didn't know what I was talking about. And I realized, man, he is no manager of lumberyards. So a little bit of time goes by, company ends up folding, and this manager starts the liquidation process of the store. And I realized then, I was just like, holy moly, this guy is really good at liquidating lumberyards. He had all the signage and advertising, the setup, and the flow of people coming in and getting out the clearance items and getting paid and all that from this clearance sale. Because when the liquidation process started of that company, it got very busy. There was so many people walking that store trying to buy up all the inventory that was discounted. And he had it set up in tiers, like, at first off, everything is going to be 25% off, and then it's going to go to 50% off, and then 75% off, and he had it all set up just perfectly like that, and I thought, man, this guy is too good at this. Anyway, the company ends up folding, and I move on. I went off and did construction, did some other things. And then about 2010, I was unemployed at that point. I was in a really bad spot financially, and a buddy of mine who worked at a different lumber yard, because the first one, when it shut down, a friend of mine went over and started managing. Well, he just went over to work there at first, but then he ended up managing a different lumber yard here in the county. And he got a hold of me. He says, "Hey, one of our salesmen is he's leaving the company, and we would love to have you come and work for the company." And I thought, yeah, I'll go back to this company. Now, I didn't really want to go back to working lumber yards, but I figured, I'm unemployed, so I got to do something. And it was a really nice facility. I mean, these lumber yards were absolutely beautiful. I mean, murals on the walls and stuff like that. I'll leave a link down in the description for you guys to show you the last few days we were there. But you would agree, these lumber yards were just absolutely outstanding facilities. Now, I knew the companies weren't doing well. It was, it's 2010. Financial crisis just ripped through the housing market. And this lumberyard, this particular one, had way over leveraged themselves. Not too unlike the corporation did, just a few years earlier than that, the one that I had worked for. But they had way over leveraged themselves with the buildings, the murals, the new equipment, mass staffing. He had a lot of staff. The offices were just beautiful. Everything, there was like no expense was spared. So anyway, I worked for this company for a couple of years, and same thing started happening. Started having issues with the vendors, started having issues with getting material, and then pretty soon this company comes in and says, hey, we manage businesses. And I thought, you know what? I recognize this. I've been here before. And I went to the manager at the time, my buddy, and I was just like, dude, this is too familiar. And he says, jump ship if you have to. He says, I'm looking for other work. You know what's happening here. You've been through this before. And I was just like, all right, man, well, I'm sticking it out. He said, I'm not. And that manager, he bailed and went off to another lumberyard, and he still works for that lumberyard. And so I stuck it out there just to, I didn't really have anything else going on, and they're still giving me a paycheck, so I stayed. And the other lumberyard was so far away from where I lived, it wasn't feasible to go to work for them. So I didn't even try to go to work for that lumberyard. But I stuck it out with this one that was failing. And when these managers came in, and I remember when the managers came in, they started playing the exact same game that the previous ones did. But this time I was a little more clued in on what was going on, and I started asking a lot of questions. And these people admitted, they were like, hey, we're a receivership company. So when a company, and you guys know, because we all knew that the company wasn't doing well, right? We knew that, that the owner was heavily in debt to all the vendors and everybody else, and that we weren't making our payments. We were failing. So it was no surprise when the company went into receivership. And they didn't try and brag up saying, hey, we know how to make lumberyards work. They just said, we come in here to deal with failing businesses to see if we can make it work. So anyway, this company comes in. I remember they had this big shot, and he wore a beautiful suit, had these huge jewelry on, these giant rings and bracelets and stuff, all gold. And I remember looking at this guy going, okay, so here's the head honcho. Here's the head honcho of this whole operation. And he had a bunch of other guys working for him too, other managers. Right? Same thing. Got to have a quick turnover. Can't be spending a lot of money on stock and keeping inventory around. And, almost the exact same thing that was taking place before. And I remember him saying, he had everybody there, and he was just like, so listen, we are going to do our best to try and save this company. We are going to do everything we can to try and make sure that everything, that you guys keep your job and that this business becomes viable. And I thought to myself that I was like, there's no way. There is no way you could sell every 2x4 in the county right now that was being sold, and you still would not have enough business to keep these stores open. There is no way that this guy was talking any kind of truth. Right? But I thought, okay, well, let's do what he says. And some things started happening there that I knew he was not trying to save the company. One of them is that the manager at the time, the real manager, my buddy, he goes to him and says, hey, I'm putting in my 2 weeks notice. I got another job at this other lumberyard. Now, if you work for a lumberyard, especially if you're in a sales position like he was, and you go to another lumberyard, you're let go that day. And it's not because they don't like you. It's not because of anything else. It's because they don't want you taking the customers. They don't want you sitting there on the phone saying, hey, I'm about ready to head over to this other company. Why don't you go over there? What I'm saying? They don't want you recruiting or taking away all the customers. So they let you go that day. That's it. He kept that guy on for 2 weeks. He kept my buddy on for 2 weeks there so that he could do exactly that. Let all the customers know that he was taking them away. And he was, and going over to this other lumberyard. And I went and questioned him about that. I said, why are you keeping this guy around? I mean, he's my friend. I mean, we go way back. I have nothing against him. I think what he's doing is the absolutely correct decision for himself and his family. I mean, I don't blame him one little bit. But it doesn't make sense that you're keeping this guy on the books. It doesn't make any sense that he gets to stay here making these phone calls to all his customers, taking all the business away, if you're trying to save this company. And he never really gave me an answer to that. But I noticed that guy started keeping an eye on me. So a couple of days go by, and we have a meeting, right? And so in this meeting, he's bringing like 10 of us up at a time, up to the conference room. And we're up there in the conference room, and we're listening, and he's pouring sunshine on everybody, talking about, again, how much he's going to save the business and how good they are and stuff like that. So I'm taking notes. And when he's all done with the blowing of sunshine, and what they're doing there is they're trying to keep the herd calm, right? They don't want everybody like all of a sudden just stealing everything and leaving, or however that works. They need people there working in order to go through the liquidation process. In order to get all the inventory out as much as you possibly can before they do like the auctions and stuff. And I could see it. I could see that happening. And he was just like, I remember he starts the meeting off by saying, well, we're here by law, for the banks and all this other stuff. And he starts spilling the sunshine. And so I questioned him. I said, you're here by law? I said, is there a law that I could look at? Is there a statute or an ordinance or something like that? And he sits up in his seat, and all of a sudden he starts talking, and he's spitting, right? And spit's flying onto the table, and I look over at my buddies, and they're like, holy shit, dude, you really pissed this guy off, And he picks up this pack of papers, right? It's all stapled together, and he tosses it at me. He says, UCC filing, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, the Uniform Commercial Code. Yeah, okay. Cool. Can I have this? And he slides that, and he says, yeah, you can have that. I got plenty of copies. I said, cool. So he gave me the copies of this bankruptcy thing and the receivership that it's going through. And I said, you're here to try and save this company. And he says, yeah, that's right. We're here to evaluate everything and to make sure that, and trying to establish things so that we can save this company. And I said, this is your job. And he says, yes, we're very good at what we do. I said, awesome. I said, how many companies do you actually save? Like, out of all these companies that you go into that are going through bankruptcy like this, how many do you actually save? And his eyes get real big, and he starts blabbering off a bunch of stuff, and it was very confusing what he was saying. And I was just like, can you give me a number, like a percentage? Like, how many do you save? Like, how many end up in bankruptcy as opposed to continuing on as a functional business? And he finally had to admit, 20%. I said, you save 20% of the companies, the rest of them go bankrupt and get liquidated? He was like, yeah, that's right. And I was just like, okay. And I said, well, you're here to try and save everybody's job. And I said, but starting tomorrow, how secure are any of our jobs? And he didn't answer the question. So I left that meeting knowing at that point that this company was going under. And everybody out there was saying, no, we're going to try and save this company and stuff. And I was like, were you not in the meeting with me? I mean, the handful of people who were in the meeting with me, they started telling other people what I had said, and they just didn't want to believe it. They didn't believe it. They thought that the company was still going to be saved. And I said, I undone everything that this guy has said. I sat there in the meeting and I questioned him on everything that he had done. I mean, I didn't go through all of it, but, I questioned him on how much he saves the company, everything that's going on as far as, this bankruptcy and what his job is to be there, what it is that he's doing there. So he ended up shutting that company down 2 weeks later, right? After I finally convinced everybody, it was just like, there's no way we're saving this company. Look at the inventory levels drop. Look at the fact that we can't get any new orders in. Look at the fact that we're, told not to do any more special orders. I said, they're liquidating this company. They're going to do it. And 2 weeks later, they did. They said, okay, we are definitely going, we're shutting the company down. We're going to go in through the liquidation process. And it started. Now, when it was all said and done, going back and looking at everything leading up to it, it was pretty obvious. It was pretty obvious that all that was going to happen. And I look at the way things are right now, when I look at the economy, and I'm reading these articles about the wave of bankruptcies coming, the amount of leveraged loans that are out there, the private equities that are buying into these leveraged loans. It's very similar. Like, to kind of explain it simply, a private equity firm and a leverage buyout, to explain it simply, will look at a company that is like failing or whatever, and they say, okay, well, you got these buildings, you got this equipment, you got this stuff, you got these assets, and those assets come to, however, $100 million. If we borrow against those assets, use those assets as the collateral for our loan, we can buy up this company. Okay? To get a loan to buy up the outstanding shares, or all the enough shares of the company to make decisions for the company. They end up owning it. And all the cash that comes into this company essentially goes through them. And if the company fails, they sell all the assets and pay the loan off. I think that's probably the easiest way to explain what a private equity firm does with the leverage buyout. And the amount of this that is taking place in this country right now is huge. The default rate of corporations is going to explode later this year, as people realize that the unemployment is too high, the outstanding debts are too big, and the amount of business taking place is too small in order for this thing to be successful. Every single Federal Reserve president that I have been listening to over the last week has almost the exact same thing to say, that this is going to take a long time to recover. And that without more fiscal policy coming from the government, that means the government going deeper into debt and spending that money into the economy, we are going to have a very harmful recovery, if we can even recover. I think about those companies that I had worked for and how obvious it was after the fact. Like, when you go back and you talk to the other employees, it was like, remember this and this, we should have seen it, right? And I tried telling them back then, I was like, believe half of what you see and none of what you hear, because this stuff is going down. And they believed everything they heard. They believed from those lawyers and those managers or whatever, those receivership guys. They believed that stuff. And so I think about it now with looking at our economy, thinking about these bankruptcies that are going to be taking place here in the future, and thinking about the liquidation that a lot of these leverage buyouts are going to be pushing these companies through, and the unemployment that's probably going to rise when these companies start to fail. Too much debt, too little income. Yeah. I'll leave links down in the description for you guys. Uneducated Economist. You guys let me know.